Hey everybody, we're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
And today we are going to be chatting about Blood in the Chocolate.
Blood in the Chocolate. This is another Legend of the Flame Princess adventure for low-level PCs. Written by Kiel Chenier, or Chenier. I don't know. It depends if it's French or not. It was originally published in 2016 and available on Drive-Thru RPG or on the Flame Princess Legend of Flame Legend of a Flame Princess store on their website.
Synopsis: there's a lady that makes real great chocolate. Secrets held in a factory. Adventurers are sent to discover the secret. May sound familiar. It's basically based off of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
It's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes. Yeah, it's basically the premise is your PCs are going to perform industrial espionage on a candy factory.
Yeah, and I think this adventure is meant to be run in the era that Lamentations is set in.
Well, it's an alternative Earth.
Yeah, I think magic would ruin sort of, like, why would they have a lot of the machinery that they had if they could just do it with magic?
Yeah, I think magic's supposed to be a rare thing anyways. I mean, if you, in the sort of preamble information, they talk about, like, warlocks that died, and that's why the tree's all crazy and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So, low magic stuff. But it's basically set in an alternative Denmark. That's where it was.
Yeah, and if you want to plop this into your adventure, they just suggest putting it anywhere where it's cold and snowy and you've got access to a port to make things make sense, I guess.
But I don't know why it needs to be cold or snowy. I didn't actually find that the weather played much of a role.
No, not at all.
Anywhere whatsoever.
Initial impressions of this adventure?
I'll give it an okay.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite Flame Princess adventure that we've covered on the podcast. I'm trying to articulate why I feel that way. It might just be more of a gut feeling than anything else. I think part of the reason, we'll get into some of the details, but I felt this was maybe more grotesque than some of the other ones that we've done. So I think that might have turned me off a little bit more. One thing I really do like about the adventure, though, is that it's a heist adventure, which is completely different than what we've normally covered. This isn't a traditional dungeon crawl. There's no boss to kill per se. It's very much like you have a bunch of tasks that you can accomplish, and for all your successes that you get out with, you get paid for you finding the secret to the chocolate or stealing a sample of this or what have you, right? Like it's not a hard win, hard lose type of situation. There's definitely gradation to success. I mean, you can really succeed and everything comes together. You come out laughing, but you can succeed a tiny little bit, make some money, and then go on your merry way.
Yeah, and I guess like a bit of preamble is like Lucia has a secret to her chocolate that it tastes amazing. Think milk chocolate versus the worst chocolate you've ever had, and there's other people that want to know her secrets. And she was an explorer at one point, and she went exploring, I don't know, in jungle area, found this magical tree, and a race of pygmies, which she was able to transport all the way back to wherever she lives and use.
I don't know why it's in Denmark, to be honest. Maybe the author's Danish. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just because, like, Lucia's a Spaniard who was in Peru, then relocated to Europe. I don't know enough about the historical context of what was going on in Europe at the time. I know that Denmark was a major shipping, powerhouse at the time. So
maybe they were exploring this area of the world at this.
Yeah, there's probably some sort of historical reasons that it's set up this way, but I'm not enough of a history buff to be able to explain the context of it. I did enjoy the backstory. Like, again, this adventure has a ton of stuff that seems to be in there mostly just for the DM's enjoyment while reading. All the backstory talking about, making sense of why there's this magical tree and why the pygmies are the way they are and who the owner of the chocolate shop is. There's also a ton of information about how the chocolate is made. Mm-hmm. Right? Like if you want to know how chocolate is made in a sort of pre-industrialized European factory, it'll tell you. There's pages of explaining how the chocolate process works in general and then how it's done in a fantasy factory.
Yeah.
Which again is sort of like mildly interesting, but also kind of superfluous. So for better or worse, I guess.
Yeah. How do you want to go about this?
I got some general impression stuff that I kind of just want to bounce what things we liked off of each other, and then we can maybe talk a little bit more about the details of the adventure. It was kind of the adventure itself is kind of bare bones in the sense that, like, here's the location, here's the things that are going on there, here's where you can find the things that you're looking for. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of things that are included in the adventure that I appreciated because it'll make running it a little bit easier. So, for example, they've included a pygmy tracker with little people pips that you can check off for every one that gets killed because there's 150 pygmies in the factory.
Yeah.
Spread throughout multiple parts of the factory. So keeping track of that seems a very time consuming, and it's an important part of knowing where the pygmies are because reinforcements can play a role in it. So having to track all of that. In general, I thought the amount of tracking would be difficult to do as a DM because you got to keep track of the location of guards. You got to keep track of where the pygmies are in relationship to each other. The owner, Lucia, has a patrol route, so she moves from room to room. So knowing where she is all the time, and then knowing how things change in response to what the PCs have done matters. On top of that, there's poisons and diseases that are time delayed, which you also need to keep track of because the diseases progress or the incubation periods terminate, and you got to bring all of that in there. So one thing I really didn't like about the adventure is that there is a lot of tracking that's important to do, which is irritating to me because it also means you got to track time in the abstract setting, right? So how do you track the time? Is it one of those situations where a round is equal to 10 minutes of game time?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know the Lamentations system enough to know how noodly they get when it comes to the old school D&D rules.
Right.
So keeping track of that type of stuff gets to be a bit much to me personally. Other people might be all over it, but like for me,
Yeah, I didn't even really give that too much thought beyond reading it. But yeah, I completely agree. It's a lot of things once you lay it out to keep track of. And I'm not a huge fan, I guess, of keeping track of things like that. Or so many things like that.
It's just a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
It can be a bit of a headache.
Yeah.
I really did like the number of potential outcomes this adventure had. Like there's the whole range of things. And the PCs becoming the new owners of the chocolate factory and keeping on with this addictive chocolate is a legitimate outcome. Like you don't have to kill all the pygmies. You can become their new god.
That's true.
And take it over. And I really did enjoy that. I don't know that you needed to include all the information in there about how the PCs could run it, because there's literally 3 or 4 different potential ways that the PCs could run it depending on what infrastructure they've left in place.
Yeah.
And again, this sort of fits the theme, which is kind of funny because we've looked at multiple Flame Princess adventures, and by different authors, and the amount of extra detail that's included in these adventures that seems to potentially have minimal actual game use is pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of a theme of these modules is to have all this kind of interesting information that may potentially come up at some point, but probably not. But in case you need it,
it's there. Yeah,
it's there, which I think is, I don't know, one way to do it. I can't say if it's a good thing or a bad thing, really. If you need it, it's great to have.
Yeah,
but most of the time, I don't think you're going to need it. Also, I didn't like the amount of body horror that there is in this adventure, and that's just my own kind of personal squeamishness.
Yeah, it's pretty R-rated, I think, this adventure, to pygmy orgies, to
oh my goodness,
blueberry person torture. And, it's
there's
like
some pretty dark. The orgy, the altars. We'll talk about that later.
The sacrifices. Like, I thought there was lots of cool stuff in this adventure. I think a big part of it could revolve around how curious your players are in eating things, really tasting things, because you get a lot of poisons and diseases
but some of them are just like traps. Just trigger traps, right? But,
like being addicted to the chocolate. That's another thing that your players can get. So there's all these things.
I mean, some of it I did think it was funny as a nod to the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like the poison that. You're turning violet, like it makes you swell up into a giant blueberry. Like that kind of was cute. Mm-hmm. But then there's the disease that makes you smell irresistible to every animal and person around you. And like all the other PCs will try to eat you alive.
Yeah.
Because they can't control themselves.
Yeah.
Or your throat turns into like peanut brittle.
Yeah.
Like some of that just was a bit gross to me. Also, I didn't really care. Like this is just sort of a personal pet peeve. That it's come up more than once with these Flame Princess adventures is that there's a disease that makes your player mute. So the way you're supposed to play that out is that the player at the table no longer gets to speak. And reading that, I'm like, come on. Like, how are you supposed to narrate what your character's doing? You're going to make everyone act out that they're swinging the sword or climbing or opening the door like that. Yeah. That type of thing, which, we've come across multiple times now in these adventures, that there's a table consequence to in-game actions that I don't like.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either. Would do without. The thing, I guess this is all general impressions of what we thought about the adventure. I don't think either of us cared so much about this adventure we've got more to complain about this adventure than we do have to compliment it, which has been unusual from the last few ones that we've done that we actually quite enjoyed. But there are redeeming qualities, I think, in it, and there's things that I did like about the adventure as well.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
Yeah. One of the things that I did like is I thought the traps on all the paintings were really neat. So if you go to remove paintings, gas is released from the frames of them. That's a first time I think I've come across that kind of trap in an adventure, and it's always neat to see new ideas, right? So it could be stolen because I think lots of people maybe think about rolling up pictures when they're looting, perhaps. So punish them for it.
I also like it, and this isn't the first time I've seen it, but sticking with the paintings, just sort of reiterating the fact that they're worth less if you cut them out of the frames and then roll them up.
Yeah.
Because then they're damaged. Like the convenient way to carry them it diminishes their value by like a half.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic of money, there's a lot of money in this adventure.
Tons, yeah.
Right? For an adventure that's supposed to be for like low-level PCs, like first or second level, this is like your big score and you retire, right? Like this is a one and you're done type of thing.
Yeah, it's your Italian job. You're robbing the bank. It's your last, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers. I don't know if I wrote it down, but if you manage to get into Lucia's bedroom, there's like 40 grand of like silver bullion or whatever it is in there. So you're just going to buy a villa in the south of France and retire. Like,
why would you keep adventuring?
That's the thing that I felt with this one is like the payoff at the end seems extravagant. But I guess the argument then is, the counter argument is that the likelihood of that level of success is low. So if your PCs do manage to hit the home run, and loot the whole thing or find this super treasure or take over the operation, that you're supposed to let them enjoy their glory. But when I read something like this, I'm always a little concerned with, if you are going to continue on with a campaign, a huge cash influx at a low level changes the nature of the game. So you can't really keep on with the exact same kind of game that maybe everyone at the table agreed upon. We're going to do this kind of game. Awesome. Sounds great. We are all kings now, right? Like it really ramps up the progression. Then again, if you're just running this as a one-shot, I don't think it's an issue.
I don't know how Lamentations was meant to be played, because none of them really have hooks to them, right? It's just sort of, maybe they're all meant to be one-shots. Because everyone thinks like, well, you're at the entrance of the factory. You're at the entrance of the dungeon. You know, there's not very much ramp up to them, and like we've talked about in previous ones, there's no history to the cult, right? It's just like, it is the way it is because that's how it is, and now you're doing the thing you were asked to do. So
yeah, which I don't think is necessarily a bad design when it comes to adventures. Like, I do appreciate standalone adventures, but whenever I'm reading them, like the tables I would run generally are not designed to be a one shot. So whenever I'm talking about an adventure, I always like to think about it in the context of like, how would I incorporate this into a campaign, or how would I use this as part of an ongoing campaign? So those are just things that always pop into my head that I have to make be aware of, that if I want to run this, then either I need to make concessions for the potential windfall that they can get, or you just have to plan on the fact that, like, hey, a bunch of lowlife suddenly have all of this money, that's going to make them targets. But I think I've mentioned it previously on other episodes that I don't like taking toys away. Like, I don't think it's fair to allow your players to get something and then the next day they get jumped by a bunch of bigger, stronger goons and steal all their money, regardless of how potentially realistic that would be. Like, it just doesn't feel good, right?
Yeah.
Like, you give, they find an amazing magic item because you were randomly rolling magic items and it's game breaking. So what happens? Well, an angel shows up and takes his sword back, right? Like, while it's one way of going about it, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Even if you're like, the angel shows up and be like, hey, my Vorpal sword, I'm going to take that back. But you can have this lesser, suckier sword, as a
my other angel sword.
Yes. Here, you can have my old sword. I'm taking that one now.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather not have to take stuff away. So I'd rather, my general style is I'd rather be stingy so I can always add more than have to take stuff away because it's quote unquote wrecking the game, or changing the game in a way that isn't fun for people.
True. So in the factory, you can pretty much move unhindered, really, aside from a few rooms, unless you run into Lucia.
I guess we should actually explicitly say what the point of being here is. I don't know that we've actually said what this.
Yeah, to steal the secrets of the chocolate.
Yeah. So the hook. I guess we didn't do the hook.
I talked about it a little bit.
You get hired.
Yeah.
By French chocolatiers, I think it was. So you're hired by the French to find stuff out. And I didn't write down all the things, but there's 5 or 10 different mission goals that you can get rewarded from. All about either acquiring samples or determining processes. So it's pretty straightforward. And as you said, you basically just can start outside the factory if you want.
Yeah, you can plop you in, and I think it's pretty easy to like get into the factory. It didn't seem like it was a difficult task.
I think it is, right? There's guards.
Yeah.
It's a closed thing, so there's locked doors. I think it's easy to walk in if there's no guards around. Right? I think this is, like I mentioned at the start of this is really a heist adventure. So success in the adventure depends on planning. So this is one of those adventures where the players should be scouting the location. They should be trying to interview guards when they're off duty, or the wharf master.
Yeah.
Right. There's a whole thing in there about how you can talk to the wharf master, who will give them lots of information and like warn them away from snooping.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because you can get hired, like you can get hired on as like a porter or something like that. And if you ask too many questions or look too armed, he's like, just, porters have gone missing before, just don't poke your nose where you're not supposed to stick it type of thing. Right. So
yeah, that's true.
I like that there was the explicit warning of danger, and then from this, from doing your due diligence, it makes it easier to at least bypass the outer guards, right? Like if you know their patrol routes and you know the entrances and things like that, a couple of skill rolls, I think you can get in fairly easily. But if you don't do that, then again, this is one of those situations where as the DM, I have to be tracking what the patrol routes are to see if at, what time of day are you trying to break in here? Night. What time of night?
Yeah.
Right? Like when I have to be that noodly that they're trying to break in at 3:15 in the morning, so I know that, guard A is found in this location.
Yeah.
That's maybe not super fun for me. And I'm sure some people are like, oh, you just roll a chance. And I'm like, no, it's not how I work. Right?
The rules are set in place. Follow them.
Well, it's unfortunately, for some things, that's how my brain works. Because the thing is, like, they give patrol routes. If it was just like at any given time there's an X% chance that the guard will be here, then that's fine, which I think is a much more reasonable way of doing it. That you say, like, during the day there's this much of a chance of you running into a guard in this place, and at night there's this much of a chance. Where that's not what's presented. It's presented as this is their route and it's a 1 hour circuit and blah blah.
Well, the problem with presenting it as a percentage chance too, then it doesn't matter if I've scouted ahead. Unless there's modifiers to that, right? Yeah. Like, if I spent 24 hours watching the place, what do I have, a 0% chance of running into a guard? Because I know exactly what their routes are?
Theoretically. But I mean, like, you'd have to say, that's when you get into like, well, do they mix up their patrol routes? Is it always the same every day? Does it change up on a schedule? Is it randomly like suddenly I'm planning all this stuff? And unfortunately, this is the type of rabbit hole my brain goes into when we start to design something, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You want the players to be able to get in, like right? Like, you got to make it so they can actually get in. So I think it's one of those situations where you might be better served by there being a flat chance to begin with, and then you can reduce the odds with taking certain behaviors, right? So for every day of observing the guards, you reduce the chance by blah. Or if you actually talk to the wharf master and find out some information, it also reduces the chance.
And I think no matter what, if you succeed in getting in, you're in, or if you fail, they put you in a prison anyway inside, or a prisoner cells or something inside.
Well, you get taken to like the testing room.
Exactly. You're in no matter what. So anyway, we've spent a lot of time talking about patrol routes.
Well, because I don't know, that's what I'm more interested in at the moment, I guess.
Anyway, well, the whole thing boils down to what do we want to keep track of, and we've already discussed that. We were keeping track of way too many things in this adventure, and now you've got to keep track of patrol routes. So we just added another thing to the long list of things that we have to keep track of. And are you a timekeeper as a DM, or are you an arbiter of the game?
Yeah. Well, again, it's one of those things that, like, it's easier if there's just chances of things occurring.
Yeah.
And I think it's a better way of going about it that, at any given time, there's this much of a chance of running into Lucia in this room. And I get that it might not make conceptual sense based off of, like, the design of the room, like of the complex. Like, well, how did they get into this room if they weren't in that room? Like, I don't care, right? Like, from a running the game standpoint, it's much easier just to be that there's a 1 in 6 chance of running into her at any given time in this room. There's a 1 in 10 chance in this room. Right? I think it's just easier to do that way as a DM.
And you could say, like, if you ran into her once, you can't run into her into the next room. Like, you get one free room or something in between. Well,
I mean, you run into her or a guard, like, there's just going to be consequences. To that, like, you're going to deal with the immediate consequences through combat, most likely. But at least then you can sort of adjudicate on the fly, which I'd rather do than make patrol routes. Again, I don't want to talk about patrol routes anymore.
It's better to deal with conflict than it is to try and play Metal Gear Solid in your D&D game.
Well, it's just there's, reading through this, there was just always another thing that I now have to keep track of. And some of them are situational. You might never get poisoned. You may never catch a disease. But I don't enjoy that aspect of it. I think it's a valid way of doing things. Like, I don't hate it. But for me personally...
So then you could just forget about it, or then when you do forget and remember about it, it happens immediately.
Yeah.
Because then you've forgotten about time and you don't know how long it's been and blah, blah, blah. It's rather, I think you're right. I would rather just have an immediate effect or no effect and just be done with it.
Well, the thing is, I don't have a problem with, say, like incubation times on diseases, but the incubation times are kind of like 10 minutes. Just make it the next day.
Yeah.
Right?
After any kind of rest. It's a good...
Every short rest, make a roll.
Yeah.
If you fail at it, progresses, right? Like you can just... It's more of that type of thing.
Yeah.
Or every time you enter a new room, roll a dice, right? Like you can do things like that aren't just so arbitrary, like after 10 minutes. Right? I don't like that. If you contracted the disease, every time you enter a new room, there's a 1 in 6 chance that the disease presents itself. Right? Once it's presented itself, it's a 1 in 10 chance of getting worse.
Yeah.
Right? And instead of having to keep track of time to like actual time passage, you just have it tied to some other arbitrary thing. And it is all arbitrary when we're talking about in the game. Like how long does it take to check a room? Right? Like again, is it 1 minute? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? Is it whatever the game says it is? Like, if the game says it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. I'd rather just hard rules like that.
I agree. Yeah. So aside from the patrol routes and running into her, I think one of the things I actually did quite enjoy about this adventure was like the giant cocoa tree and like the environment of the pygmies being caretakers of it and their relationship with the tree and the bugs of the tree and how that the bugs pollinated the tree. And the pygmies worshipped the tree, therefore they worshipped the bugs, and that the bugs would infect the pygmies with eggs.
The bugs are some of the worst things in this.
Like gross, like
heebie-jeebies.
So there's these giant, they call them El Grancudos, whatever that means in Spanish. I don't know.
The big something.
Yeah, big bugs. Who knows? Anyway, so the pygmies live about the base of the tree, and these bugs pollinate the tree, and they'll come down every so often and scoop up a pygmy and then infect them or whatever and
lay eggs
inside of them, right? So
they lay this is important. They lay their eggs inside of a living host.
Yeah.
The larvae then mind control the pygmy. So the pygmy just is like docile and relaxed, and then the remainder of the tribe care for the infected pygmy until the developed
larvae
bugs burst out of the...
Yeah, it's super gross, but it's like a really cool interaction in like ecosystem. I thought that there's all this motivation between why the pygmies are taking care of the tree and why they worship things, and
I think it's a super cool idea.
Versus the random rites that can be happening when you show up in this room.
I'm not done with the mosquitoes yet. My favorite part of it, ignoring all the grossness, is that to be taken by a mosquito is an honor.
Yeah.
So if one of these bugs picks up a pygmy and carries them off, the rest of the tribe cheers and is super happy because they've been chosen to become a precious carrier. And what I was thinking when I was reading this, if you're running this adventure, that's the first thing that happens once the PCs enter the room.
Yeah.
They have to see that happen. Serves 2 reasons. 1, super weird.
Yeah.
And 2, it's great foreshadowing that there's giant bugs in the tree and they can pick people up.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So it's a warning on top of like just the idea of the pygmies cheering when some giant bug carries them off into the tree.
Yeah.
As far as the PCs know to eat, right?
Yeah.
I like the imagery of that. And yes, next to the tree, there's sacrificial altars.
Which there's a number of different things that the pygmies can be doing when you
random
enter the
roll.
room. I don't know if you've written any of them down.
I wrote down, I'm not super squeamish, but when blood orgy is one of the tamer things the PCs can stumble upon here, it's a bit much, is what I have written down word for word.
Yeah, so the pygmies can be sacrificing and having sex and orgies and all sorts of stuff. I didn't write any of it down. I thought it was a bit much,
the
unnecessary.
berry orgy might be one of the worst things I've ever read, and I didn't care for it.
Yeah, so if you're interested, go check it out. if it fascinates you, put it in your game. I mean, it could be any type of tribe doing or whoever people's doing this stuff. But yeah, it was just too much, I think. I don't know. Why? I guess the question is just why.
It was a little off-putting.
It doesn't add anything. I think like the bugs and like maybe, you could see larva burst out of a pygmy on one of the altar tables when you come in, and then they pick a new host. That's a perfectly graphic and like thematically reasonable thing to have happen when you go in there, because that's sort of the nature of the ecosystem of the place. But everything else is just like, why? Like,
well, because there's a lot of dark stuff in here.
Yeah.
A lot of violence. There's some sexual violence. I mean, berry orgy aside, right? Like, there's some pretty dark things in here. And I think I don't want to imply too much about the author, but I think that part of the design decisions for the adventure was to sort of illustrate the evil of man, right? Like, because there's no real supernatural evil associated with this. I think that's part of the reason for it, like the adventure as a whole, that like you're dealing with people, like Lucia is just an evil person, but like normal evil, quote unquote, not supernatural evil. Like,
right.
I think, and I think that might be some of the reason that like just self-indulgence and avarice and those in cruelty, how that can become something really awful, you know?
7 deadly sins ish.
Yeah, right? Like it's just sort of,
it's the worst of the worst. Yeah.
Which I can understand from sort of a design standpoint, but it is uncomfortable in places. I think might be the way to put it. Uncomfortable in the same type of way that like when we talked about the Carnival of Tears one, like there's just some dark things in it, and you gotta kind of just know your table.
Yeah.
Like, this is I think this is one of those adventures that it's not going to be for everyone, and I don't think it's for me. Like, I don't know that I would run it for my table just due to some of the themes explored in it. But it's again, I think one of those adventures that you just sort of have to run for the right type of people and have the buy-in, because otherwise it's potentially quite off-putting.
Yeah, I'm with you.
The mosquito thing's pretty great. I like that.
Yeah, so that was the thing that I really like, the mosquitoes, and I think you could like use that somewhere else, right? It's a good reason for why a tribe of things would be worshipping a thing, right? And it's, you could get that out of goblins. Like, why do goblins worship what they worship? Like in kobolds or whatever it is. So,
sorry, just what popped into my head when I was reading something else is I think another thing about this that really sort of put me off with some of the body horror and other issues in this is the contrast, because there is humorous parts in this, like as you just meant, there's like some things that are designed just to be kind of goofy and silly, and oh yeah, that was in the movie, I remember that, or I was in the book, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the really dark stuff. So I think I didn't really care for the extremeness of the contrast, because you're like, oh, that's super lighthearted, and like that's really the opposite of that, right? So I think that might be part of why I didn't like the elements as much. The contrast sort of made it darker, right? Because there's a room where there's fruit painted on the walls, and you can lick the fruit and taste the flavors, right? And there's bananas and strawberries, and then these weird sort of green berries. And if you lick the strawberries, they taste like strawberries, and you lick the bananas, they taste like bananas, and you lick the weird berries, as it says in the thing, the game master is encouraged to let the player know that yes, the snozberries even taste like snozberries, right? Like, but I'm like, ha ha ha, that's, it's funny, right? And then the next room you run into a blood orgy, so like that type of,
and maybe that's what he was going for, or she when they were writing it, right? And it's just like, what is the worst case scenario that you could think of about this whole situation, right? Like, what is the darkest of the dark? And they've hit it on the head, right? Like that could be the worst case scenario of this whole situation, that the Oompa Loompas were in fact blood orgying in the other room while making your chocolate happily in the other room, right? I mean, I don't care for it like yourself, and I guess I can see whatever, that's sort of what you've decided to go for, but regardless,
I guess it's enough.
He jumps to another gruesome room, which is the inventing room, where Lucia...
Hilda Copperplate?
It's got Hilda Copperplate in there, who's a woman who's eaten whatever berry and is...
It's the noxious berry poison.
Yeah.
I wrote it down.
And so she's swelled up like the blueberry, but she's trapped inside of a device, which she...
It's the squeezing machine.
Which she squeezes her to get berry juice out of, but, okay, neat, cool. But now, aside from that, she's been running experiments on her and ripping out portions of her skin and also using her as a sex slave, right? So
again,
it's like...
why? Why? That was something I was reading. I'm like, why?
Yeah, so it's like you've got like a pretty cool, like also still gruesome part about juicing someone that's alive, but it's like, you can deal with that. But then why did you add all this other stuff on top of? Yeah. Could have done without.
I mean, it really, I guess, unless you're just trying to reinforce the idea that Lucia is an awful person, which she is.
She is,
super awful. But I don't know that you didn't like it. One thing I will say about the Hilda here is she's super important, and it's not really developed in the way that I would have thought, because she was also sent by French chocolatiers. So it seems like a missed opportunity to not make this a rescue mission or make it as an objective. They're like, oh, we did have someone, if you can find out what happened to our other agent.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. Like, I think Hilda should have been a mission objective. Because it's why not?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it totally makes sense. And then the other thing that's super important about Hilda is, other than Lucia, she's the only person that knows how to get into Lucia's bedroom. Because, speaking of Lucia's bedroom, it was really neat that the lock on Lucia's door is a piano, and you have to play, or keyboard or and you have to play a couple of bars of a tune to unlock it. And I can't remember what the song was, but the only other person other than Lucia that knows it is Hilda, and that's the only way to get into that room with like the tons of goodies. Like, there's all the money and stuff like that in there. So this is a really important NPC who, helping would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Talk about the twins. Speaking
well, you know what? I thought it was over, but then I flipped my page over, and then there's a prison where she keeps children hostages and also experiments on them. So
the two twins that ran away from home to go live in the chocolate factory.
Yeah, it's too bad because this adventure has so many redeeming qualities. Like, there's things that are really neat, and like,
it's a cool idea. Yeah. Like, if I just said, like, it's a Charlie in the Chocolate Factory heist where you're trying to steal steal Willy Wonka's Willy Wonka's secrets. Like, that's a cool concept.
And there's just aspects of it which just sort of ruin it, really. And like,
ruin it for me. Like, I can totally get, like, this is a personal taste thing. I think some people might be like all over the gruesomeness of it, but like, there's a certain point where like I just don't enjoy it anymore.
Like, why? I don't know. Like, just replace the children with pygmies.
Yeah, the idea of finding starved children chained in a room, and then on top of the fact that they're starved children chained in a room, she's been experimenting on them and infected them with diseases.
Yeah.
So, like, once again, as soon as you try to rescue them after a fixed period of time, they start to become symptomatic.
Yeah.
And if any PC tries to help the children, if they come in contact with the children, they automatically contract the disease with no save whatsoever.
Yeah.
And like, just that whole thing, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I guess that's really all I have to say about it. Like, I don't need to get into it, but I thought it was just really... I thought it was mean-spirited.
The problem, I guess the problem is with this stuff that's like so, 10 out of 10 bad in it, is you can't make it better.
Yeah.
You can't help these people. So what's the point, right? Like, you can't reverse the effects or...
And the thing is, like, I'm fine in some situations where, like, you can't help somebody.
Yeah.
Right? But it's set up in a way that you might want to try to help somebody, and then you're penalized for it.
Yeah.
Like, for some of the children in particular, like, just automatically catching their diseases, that's not fun or fair.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm totally okay with a situation where, like, if you're going to be trying to help cure them, there's a chance that you're going to catch a disease, but like you can't just make it an automatic success.
Yeah.
Right? Like there should be a cost to doing the right thing. I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with creating a system that de-incentivizes trying to help.
Yeah.
Because you're automatically punished.
Yeah.
Right? So...
yeah, leave them to it, I guess.
Well, it's not even that. Like, I just... you got to be fair. And you can't just have it that you have... Like, for every other instance where you're dealing with the diseases, like, there's always a chance to catch it.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't just be an automatic failure to make your save.
It's pretty punishing because
in this particular situation.
It was written like, oh, I want them to have these diseases because who's not going to help the kids?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So it's yeah.
Hence the reason why I said it's a bit mean spirited.
It is
right?
mean,
like,
yeah.
I didn't care for that.
The other thing that I thought was pretty cool was like Lucia's mirror.
Oh, the mirror was neat.
Yeah. That you can walk through it, and she actually converses with another like heroine or somebody from another Lamentations of a Flame Princess adventure.
Yeah.
So you could run this adventure into another adventure, run into them later on, right? Or there's this kind of overlapping metagaming happening between adventures. Or two parties could run into each other through this mirror,
it was a cute little detail.
Yeah,
I agree.
That was neat,
especially considering it's in her room and it's very difficult to get to. So there's no guarantee that you'd ever even encounter it. Yeah. But it is sort of a neat Easter egg, I guess you could almost consider it. Another thing I did really like is Lucia's amulet as a magic item.
Yep.
So I can't remember what the name of it was. Something of something. But it's an amulet that basically slows your aging.
Halves it.
So while you're wearing it, you age at half speed and you are immune to diseases and poison, but only while you wear it. So if a player has a disease or is poisoned, if they put the amulet on, they will be cured of all of the symptoms and what have you. But as soon as they take the amulet off, all the symptoms come back. So I thought that was kind of a cool design decision. And if, you take it off of Lucia, she becomes an old woman before your eyes and gains like 200 pounds or something like that. Because the amulet's been staving off her obesity from all the chocolate she's been eating. Which I thought was kind of just a neat idea for a magic item.
Yeah.
Because I really do like magic items that have sort of downsides to them. Like I remember forever ago when you were running your campaign and somebody got a Ring of Trucine or something like that. I think it was a random treasure roll and it was a super OP thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever did it, but I remember suggesting to you that you should make the ring have an actual eye on top of it that looks around and like you can't take it off once it's on. So like
I did implement it.
You did implement that? Yeah, right. Yeah. So the idea that it's a super powerful magic item, because these were lower level PCs at the time, but there's the downside to it that like you now have it attached to you and you got this gross sort of like eye looking around as a downside that like you gotta keep your hands in your pockets when you're in polite company or what have you, right? So
I think someone offered to buy it from them eventually, but told them they'd have to remove their finger to buy it from them. They opted to get a special glove made or something like I can't remember exactly, but it was pretty funny. Yeah.
Right. But the idea that like you can get cool magic items, but if they're not perfect, so this seems like a super powerful magic item, and it is as long as you never take it off. But as soon as it comes off, then all this catch up happens.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very cool.
I don't have too much more to say about this adventure. Do you want to talk about how it can conclude?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just to sort of wrap up the actual adventure part, I think the layout makes sense. There's lots of neat things in it. I mean, there's a chocolate river that you can take a paddle boat on. So like the fun cutesy things are fun and cutesy, but it is heavily contrasted with the darker elements in it. So I think running it could be fun if I toned it down.
Yeah. But
I guess sort of as a general caveat is it really needs to be emphasized that this isn't a kill and everything adventure. Like if you have very combat focused players if they try to just like, let's fight all the baddies, there's 150 pygmies or something, all of which use like poison blow darts and stuff. Like the likelihood of actually winning a drawn out fight is fairly low. Yeah. So it really is a you really just got to go in and be focused. Mm-hmm. I mean, best case scenario, I mean, this sort of ties into like talking about wrapping it up, is best case scenario, you'd fight Lucia, who's tough, right? I mean, there's guns in the game and she has some guns and things like that. But if you can defeat her while she's being defended by pygmies, but if you kill her while there's pygmies around, whoever kills her gets to be their new god, effectively. Yeah. So if she gets defeated, they stop fighting and start worshiping whoever defeated Lucia. And then that opens up a lot of really interesting potential things, right? Because this is what opens up the possibility that your players now take over the operations. And as part of their exploration, they might have come across her accountant. Mm-hmm. What do they do when they encountered her accountant? If they killed him, then they're have some issues. If they didn't, then he'll run the operation for you if you want. Like there was so much information about what could happen after the fact. It was a bit overwhelming to a certain extent because in a perfect world, you just get paid by the French chocolatiers and everyone goes off on their happy way. But like, you could sell the operation to the French chocolatiers for not as much money as it really should be. But you can make 10 grand, I think, is what it was set to. You can take over the operation and run it yourself. You could have whatever his name is run it for you. And what I did like about the operation is it was a random amount of profit made every month. Mm-hmm. So like you could make tons of money or you could lose money. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like the way they structured the actual profiting of it. But it's one of those situations where the game starts off where you're a bunch of shifty thieves, and by the end you're now chocolate barons. You know what I mean? Like it has the potential to really shift the nature of the game. On the other hand, if it's a one-off and then suddenly that's how it winds out, I think that's fine. Yeah. I also think it would be funny if one of the PCs got picked up by the mosquitoes and impregnated with larvae, but that's sort of the opposite end of the success matrix. I don't know. I mean, it seems really generous at the end of the day, like that what you could come away with is a stupid amount of money, I would say, for first level PCs. So like that, I don't know if I'd probably want to tone that down a little bit. It seems extensive, the amount of money that you could come off with, and a lot of money at low levels again kind of destabilizes stuff sometimes. But I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. The fun parts of this are too darkly contrasted by the gruesome bits, and I think at the end of the day you're not going to remember the fun stuff. You're going to remember the nasties. So I wouldn't run it. Anything else you want to talk about, Rye, before we wrap it up?
Actually, I just checking my notes here. There's one thing that I did like about the adventure, in that you don't get to rest in it, right? And then that's something else which was the case in the one we talked about last week. What was it? Death Frost Doom. But that was a magical effect that prevented you from sleeping. This one is just the fact that you're trying to rob a factory, that so you can't just like, okay, well, let's go sleep for 8 hours in the storeroom. Like, no, you can't do it. So that's kind of just a pacing thing that I liked. One thing though that I would have appreciated being in there is, what if the PCs have multiple incursions, right? So what if you break in multiple times? How do the defenses change? How do things escalate? And that information wasn't really in the adventure, and I think that's a reasonably likely outcome. Right? Like I could definitely see PCs wanting to go back multiple times, or at least back a second time type of thing, especially if they got into a fight with pygmies and were hurt and injured and wanted to fall back to like rest and recuperate. What are the consequences of doing that? And that the type of information I would have liked to see in the adventure. I like the idea behind this, right? Let's take a well-known property, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and let's turn it into a Lamentations of the Flame Princess adventure. But yeah, like with you, I didn't like the starkness of the contrast between the goofy parts and the awful parts, I guess is the way to think about it. I like that it was a heist. Tonally, though, I think it just doesn't suit my personal style of adventure. Other than that, I think if it's more your kind of thing, if you're big into, corpse horror and things like that, I could see people enjoying this. It's just not for me.
Yeah, agreed. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Next week, we're tackling Tower of the Stargazer. Email us, please, at theimpandogre@gmail.com or at theimpandogre on the Twitters. And
we're always looking for more adventures, so your suggestions are appreciated. And I guess we could point out all this Lamentations of a Flame Princess stuff were recommended by listeners, so it's always appreciated.
Hope you liked it.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks for listening, guys.
See you later. Bye.